Well, good evening. Thanks for coming. Through the last 7 sessions, I guess you heard things about financing, intellectual property, corporate structures, product market fit, and you're going to hear it all again. That's why I've got 96 slides. No, actually, the reason I have 96 slides is because I was told that I could have at least 10 slides for every letter that's in the name of this seminar. So we're covering a lot of topics, and so first, just so you know a little bit about me, I'm not a young startup guy like you, but I have been through a few startups in my time. But actually, I worked both, I guess half of my career for large companies, GE and Bell, and half of them on startups, and more recently, fixing companies that kind of went awry either at the beginning or in the middle of their life and needed to be refocused. My whole career has been focused on getting technology adopted by the user. And that began with GE, continued through in terms of running businesses, part of businesses, et cetera. My last role with NBS, we were about a 240-person company operating in 5 countries, selling equipment in 100 different places, through channels, through direct. And so I was brought in. I was the 6th president in 7 years. We were losing about 20% of revenue a month, and we turned it around, and I exited after about 4 years. My CFO continues to run the company, and they make your credit cards. They make all sorts of wonderful little plastic cards with chips in them and things like that. So we did everything from the fabrication of the card to the software on the card to personalizing the cards. Today, I live my life. In the last 4 years, I've lived my life as an executive coach, executive in residence with BC Innovation Council, and also a very small, modest angel investor here in Vancouver. So, on to what we want to talk about today. We're going to focus on buying versus selling. In order to sell, you have to understand how people buy and why they buy. And so a lot of the focus tonight is on that buying behavior, what it is, what it takes in order to do that. Second thing is, what is your product really being hired to do? What's the use of it? I had an interesting story trying to fix NBS, where I walked into a manufacturing plant where the manager said, my equipment's just fine. It's the customer that is the problem. He doesn't know how to use it, he doesn't know how to maintain it, etc. So I said, how much does he pay for that machine? Oh, about $250,000. How much do you pay for your car? Oh, about $60,000. And what kind is it? It's a Toyota. I said, how long have you had it? 3 years. He said, has it ever broken down? He said, no, I just take it in for regular maintenance. I said, well, when was the last time the machines broke down? Well, they broke down 3 weeks after it went into the factory. So he's paying now 4 times as much for the machine. It's lasting not nearly as long as the car. There's something wrong here. You're not building museum pieces. So you have to think of what your product is being used or being hired to do. What's the utility factor? You're not making, as I said, something to sit on a shelf or just look pretty. So most of you, presumably, how many of you are in digital media? How many of you are making products, per se, that goods and things that people are going to buy? All right. Other things in between, enterprise software, things like that. Okay, so we've got a good mix of people. I'll try to cover the gamut. Obviously, there's some differences between the marketing and selling of each of those types of products. Third key point is the WIFM factor. What's in it for me? We've got to understand the different buyer types, and we have to understand how we reach and approach and fulfill the needs of those particular people. And lastly, really, is when we get into this, talking about the sales and sales process, is you have to manage sales, and you can't manage what you don't measure. You have to look at it as a process and making sure that you are getting the results. So let's start talking about the value chains. And there's really 2 value chains here that you have to consider. One is the selling process, and that is, how is it that you're reaching customers? Are you going directly, or are you going through a channel, et cetera? And the second is your product actually something that an end user uses, or is it a component in a larger picture or a larger system that the customer is going to get utility? So you're selling it to somebody, but he's not actually the user, other than in the sense of getting utility, other than helping him get utility or helping him sell his product. making it a complete product. So let's consider, just for example, you've created the latest, greatest wheat seeds. And those wheat seeds you're selling to farmers. So when they grow wheat, they're going to sell it, but they're not selling it to somebody who actually consumes it. They're going to sell it to somebody who's going to mill it. And that flour that's milled is going to then be sold to somebody, presumably, let's say, who's going to make bread. That bread may get consumed directly, or it actually may be part of your sandwich. So if you think of the actual value chain here, it ends with somebody consuming a sandwich, but it began with somebody actually selling seeds out here. And you have to understand, and there's a very simple, non-technical example, I'll call it, but you have to think of where your product is actually being put into the value chain. A very simple one is direct to consumer. How many people expect to be selling direct to a consumer, to the user? Okay? Only about a third, about a quarter. So that is absolutely the simplest. And I know that you've been through positioning statements with Ralph Turfus. If you attended the first session, he probably hammered home how you have to actually get a positioning statement. You have to understand what the pain is. You have to understand what the benefit is. And you have to understand what your differentiated value is. So clearly, yeah, that's one positioning statement that allows you to address the particular need of the customer. Gets a little bit more, in that case, there's no middlemen. You can easily talk to customers. You can easily get feedback. You develop your own sales mechanism in order to reach those customers. And you get to educate the customer about your product directly. You get to communicate. You get to control the communications that is going to the customer. It gets a little more complicated when you have an intermediary. And in the case of an intermediary, you actually have to create a positioning statement for the intermediary, who is the purchaser or payer of your product, and you have to create a positioning statement for the user. Otherwise, the intermediary has no way of communicating the value of your product, and it'll sit on his shelves, or it won't actually get used or purchased. And he'll get frustrated with you as a supplier. So you have to actually create two positioning statements addressing both pains and gains that are going to be derived and satisfied by your product. So understanding, in that case, actually two different buyers. Right? You have to understand what the problem is that you're solving with two different buyers who have two different needs. Hopefully, they're somewhat aligned. So if we have somebody like Google, the user pain is finding stuff. And the purchaser pain is selling stuff. They're creating or acting as a vehicle for people who are finding stuff, or acting as a marketplace for those people who are trying to sell stuff to people who are trying to find stuff. They're trying to make it easy to make that match. Let's think of a channel business model where you actually have a channel partner. So he is, in this case, possibly making or adding services to it, but you actually still have two customers, two different objectives, two different benefits that are being conveyed, because they may have a related pain, but they're not identical. By no means are they identical. If you're dealing with a distributor of your product, a retailer, for example, they're trying to actually build volume on a sales floor, but if you're selling a drink, for example, they're not really worried about being thirsty, but your consumer end user is interested, such as a 7-Eleven and your Monster drinks. The general partner wants to get thirsty people into the store, and the user has a pain, which is, I'm tired and thirsty and I want to be quenched, I want to get energized, and so you need to have an address on a positioning statement both issues. How are you going to help thirsty people and get into the store? In most cases, when you're talking about a retailer, they're going to be interested. What are you going to be doing to promote your product so that they come into my store looking for your product? So now we have a more complex value chain here where you have a manufacturer, a purchaser, and an end user. You need a positioning statement for each one of these. So in this case, your product is probably a component of a bigger assembly. It might be a piece of software that gets used in or embedded in some other piece of software or a mobile device, or might be a small widget that goes into a larger piece of assembly. The end user has no idea who you are, how your product works, whatever, doesn't care. It's the overall system that's important, and you have to make sure that your positioning statement addresses how well you fit into the system, but also convey value all the way down the value chain to the end user. There's lots of middlemen, and therefore lots of positioning statements, and you have to understand, in the course of your discovery, understand what it is that is the pain of each one of those, and how is it that you can address those pain in the construct of your product. So let's look at a roll-up example of that, a pretty complex one, and Ralph might have touched on this one because it's a company that he is involved with called Redland Technologies. There's a core technology, there's a standalone product, an integrated product, and then a customer solution. So the first basic product is Redland, which produces a cadmium zinc telluride material, which goes into medical imaging devices. And that medical imaging company, Spectrum, happens to be in Israel. And they are selling to GE. And GE is producing a large CAT scan or CT scan imaging system. That then goes into say, Vancouver General Hospital. But they're not actually the end user. The end user is the patient who, if we think of the manufacturer pain, Spectrum is looking for these guys is looking for a more efficient detector. GE is looking for a more efficient imaging system. They're the integrator. The purchaser, VGH, is looking for lower operating costs, more throughput. And the end user is looking for faster diagnosis with less radiation, less exposure to radiation. Okay? So in conveying your message, yes? Rubbing on my jacket. Sorry.
Sorry, microphone adjustment. Sorry.
Just take my jacket off. How's that?
Sometimes if you go like that, it helps enough. There we go. Thanks.
Okay? All right. So in conveying your actual positioning statement in the marketplace, Redland actually has to identify the benefit right to the end user, right? In talking about their product, what they are doing. That's going to help attract all of these people and build support all the way through the value chain. But they cannot ignore any one of these individual elements. Very complicated, much more complicated than a simple direct-to-user. That's why we encourage entrepreneurs, whenever they can, to be as simple in their value chain approach as they possibly can, especially starting out. So we might also have one which is we'll call a multifaceted approach or value chain, and that's where you have perhaps a common technology or product, but multiple markets that it can work in. You still need to have, again, you can't have a generic product positioning statement. It just doesn't work. You have to write a positioning statement to attract customers. Therefore, you have to address their pain, address what benefits you're providing, and make sure that it's clearly articulated, emotionally stated. So in this case, it could be to many end customers. You want to talk directly to those customers. You're selling directly to those customers, so you want to talk directly to those customers to understand what their pain is and what benefits you're providing, what solutions you're providing to give them and deliver them the benefits. In this case, an example of this would be a laser cutter. A laser cutter, pretty generic, can be used in many different things. It can be used for architectural drawings. It can be used for a craftsperson who is trying to do engravings, for example. It can be used for a card maker who is trying to do a very labor-intensive type of cardstock cutting or enhancing. And it can be used for somebody who's doing clothing design in the lower right-hand corner where you're trying to put decals and intricate design on a particular piece of clothing. So in this case, you definitely need to have individual positioning statements for each individual market. And there is no shortcut, or there are no shortcuts in that. As you go to market, you need to have individual positioning statements all the way along the value chain. So everywhere that you don't have a common market segment, you need to develop a specific positioning statement, a specific proposition for that market. And everybody in the value chain, from the beginning of who you might sell it to the end user, you need to understand the value proposition you offer to those different people in the value chain. If you're 4 layers away from the user, better understand exactly what you're doing all the way down. So let's dig in to understand exactly what the business, what your products are doing. Okay, so I'm going to play you this. There's not much video in it other than listening to him stand. So I'll try to rock here on the stage, and you can pretend that I'm talking. But this fellow is talking about is really talking about a milkshake. And the challenge of the supplier of milkshakes was, how do I grow? So just bear with me and listen to this and think about the questions that I have below here.
School. I brought with me a set of puzzles, all related to innovation. We decided that the way we teach marketing is at the core of what makes motivation difficult to achieve. The most helpful way we've thought of it so far is that we actually hire products to do things for us. And understanding what job we have to do in our lives for which we would hire a product is really the key to cracking this problem of motivating customers to buy what we're offering. So I wanted just to tell you a story about a project we did for one of the big fast food restaurants. They were trying to goose up the sales of their milkshakes. They had just studied this problem up the gazoo. They brought in customers who fit the profile of the quintessential milkshake consumer. And they'd give them samples and ask, could you tell us how we can improve our milkshakes so you'd buy more of them? Do you want it chocolatey or cheaper, chunky or chewier? They get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions, and it had no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So one of our colleagues went in with a different question on his mind, and that was, I wonder what job arises in people's lives that cause them to come to this restaurant to hire a milkshake. So we stood in a restaurant for 18 hours one day and just took very careful data. What time did they buy these milkshakes? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? It turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. The people who bought them were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they all got in the car and drove off with it. So to figure out what job they were trying to hire it to do, we came back the next day and stood outside the restaurant so we could confront these folks as they left milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, we essentially asked, excuse me please, but I got to sort this puzzle out. What job were you trying to do for yourself that caused you to come here and hire that milkshake? And they'd struggle to answer, so we'd then help them by asking other questions like, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation. needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And then as we put all of their answers together, it became clear that they all had the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they also wanted something that would just down there and stay for their morning. Good question. What do I hire when I do this job? You know, I've never framed the question that way before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hire bananas. They're gone in 3 minutes, you're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I probably hire donuts twice a week, but they don't do it well either. They're gone fast, they crumb all over my clothes, they get my fingers gooey. Sometimes I hire bagels, but as you know, they're so dry and tasteless. Then I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting jam on them, and then if the phone rings, we got a crisis. I remember I hired a Snickers bar once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. Let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? I don't. All I know is I'm full all morning and it fits right here in my cup holder. Well, it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which in the customers' minds are not Burger King milkshakes, but it's bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. But I hope you can see how, if you understand the job, how to improve the product becomes just obvious.
So, how is the job of the milkshake discovered?
Research,
What sort of research?
getting out in the field and looking to see what people are doing.
Getting out of the office. Right? All of the marketing gurus in the world sitting back in head office by changing the price and changing the chunkiness and all that sort of stuff couldn't figure out how to actually increase the sales of milkshakes. Talking to customers, found out what the utility value of the milkshake was. Who would have thought 50% of the milkshakes were bought in this outlet, 50% were bought before 8 o'clock in the morning? Not what you typically think, or what we typically think anyway, would be the normal pattern for purchases of milkshake. So what functionality was being provided? What feelings were being satisfied? Satiation, yeah, hunger, yeah. Boredom, right?
Occupation of the free hand.
Occupation of the free hand, yeah. Don't know what to do with it. I can drive with one hand. Obviously, not manual shifts, not like Europe. This was obviously done in the U.S. How often were the needs satisfied? Every morning. Every morning. The frequency was every working morning driving to work. Right? How would you expand milkshake sales? Okay?
Breakfast shake.
Breakfast shake?
I put small dedicated drive-throughs right by entrances to apartments.
Okay. Now that you know, just think of how your juices change now that you know what the customer's utility is. Now be honest, how many of you would have had the same answers if I had asked you how to increase milkshake sales before seeing that video? Okay, well, prior knowledge always helps, right? So, the moral of this story is getting out and talking to customers. In other words, customer discovery is absolutely critical, fundamental to not only a new business, but an existing business. This one. Right? I don't know how long they've been producing milkshakes, probably 50 years. Okay? So let's talk about a customer development model that we have borrowed heavily from Steve Blank. Okay, so customer development is a 4-step framework with, I'm going to say, 4 stop signs. Each one is kind of circular. So first of all is to discover and validate that you've actually identified a market, tested a market. Secondly, and that market is actually defined by, is there a pain? Is there a need? Is there a burning issue that has to be addressed by you? Maybe your product isn't quite created yet, but first thing, forget products. Is there actually a need? And if you find an actual need and start applying resources, you'll probably find a product to suit it. So markets do not begin with products. Markets begin with needs. Secondly, have we built the right product that satisfies and solves customers' problems, customers' needs? Thirdly, have we actually tested and developed correct methods for acquiring and converting customers? In other words, acquiring and giving value or creating value for customers. So we might actually have identified that there is a product or a need out there in the marketplace. We might have found a product that can solve the problem. But if we don't have an actual viable business to be able to deliver it, if we haven't found a cost-effective way to do that, then we actually haven't a correct method for acquiring and converting customers. Fourthly, have we developed the right resources to actually scale and grow and continue? In other words, thrive and be totally sustainable. So in his book, 4 Steps to Epiphany, Steve Blank breaks each of these down into 4 key steps. Let's explore those steps. Oops, sorry. So customer discovery, the first one, which I'm presuming most of you are in startup mode and therefore are at this customer discovery stage and don't have a lot of them right now. You first want to write down all of your assumptions, what the problem, demand, pricing, market. In other words, what's your hypothesis about what the market actually, what market exists? Secondly, we want to talk to some friendly contacts. We want to actually go out, explore, find out, does the problem actually exist? What we thought was a problem, does it actually exist? How big is it? How many people? Thirdly, you have a concept, presumably, for solving that problem. So would the solution that you're offering or proposing to offer actually solve the problem? Or are there other things that perhaps the customer might want to have? And then fourthly, you've got to verify that. You've got to verify that through a series of discussions, a series of feedback, assessments, etc. And you may have to actually go back and restate your hypothesis. You may find that your hypothesis was wrong. And don't be afraid. That's not an issue. The main thing is that you're cycling through this. I think, as probably Ralph might have identified, is that a startup is a business that's in search mode. You're in search for a scalable, repeatable business process that can grow. You're not in business yet. You haven't committed to customers. And this is where you need to go through this cycle of discovery. And you keep going through this cycle of discovery. Getting a very, very detailed discussion of what your hypothesis is. Okay, what are your features? Key benefits that you're proposing to offer. So this is basically a thumbnail sketch of what your business is, including your position statement. Your customers, what types of customers are you going to go after? You can say the overall market because you don't know which is the key customer at this point in time. How are you going to sell it? What are you going to sell? What price are you going to sell it? How are you going to create some demand? What type of market is it? Is it a totally new market where you're just don't have anything that's really similar to it? Are you resegmenting it? Are you going into a niche market? Are you trying to be a lower cost solution provider? And then who are your competitors? If you don't have competitors, that might be a good thing on one hand, but it might also be an indication that there isn't a market or isn't a problem. Secondly, to test your problem hypothesis, right? You want to figure out who to talk to, what questions you need to ask to uncover their needs. A very set of open. You're listening. You're asking questions and listening. You're not telling. You're not selling. There's nothing to sell at this point in time. Indeed, you don't even want to get involved in actually committing to a product because you don't know what your product is. You don't know what features yet have to be provided. So you develop a series of guesses about what the needs are and test them in the marketplace by actual customer conversations. If you've talked to 50 customers, you've probably just started. Steve Blank would say you probably haven't even got the right questions until you've got about 70 questions, or 70 customers, potential customers interviewed. If you're doing a digital media, set up a test website and test the traffic and change it and play with it and see what sort of traction you get. Next one is you got to test your problem-solving capability. Does what you're proposing to solve, or your solution, actually resonate with the customer? Does it deliver the value, the benefits that the customer is expecting? Are there more things? What if you tweak it just a little bit? Are there fewer things? What if you just reduce it? Maybe it's just a little simple thing that you can fix on it. And then you want to incorporate all of that feedback into basically a resampling. In other words, incorporate it, do it once, do it again, and you keep cycling through this until you feel that you have it right, that you actually feel as though you have a market, you have significant size, you have a problem that people clearly identify as benefits, and you have the least complex product to actually deliver some value to customers. So that is how you go through the customer discovery. And you don't pass customer discovery until you get that confidence, until you actually get that traction in the marketplace, in the customer discovery portion, that says my variations every time I go around this loop are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I'm honing in now on the key elements of the market and what I need to do from a product standpoint. So the red lines here are stop. You don't go any further. You pivot. In other words, you pivot on the discovery portion initially. Change your tack, change your market, change your features, change what you're considering doing. The worst thing you can do is dig your heels in and say, I have a product, I'm going to go to the marketplace. Right? It's all about what is the customer's problem and how fully or how much are you satisfying in terms of providing a solution. So those early people that you're talking to, where you might get your first alpha product out to, are the people we call the innovators. They're the people that are geeks. They want to play with your product. They don't mind having an imperfect product. They are just interested in innovating. What we really want to, in order to validate the product, which is really the first market, is the early adopter. So the customer discovery really, I'm going to say, we find out what's the problem, and we pass stop when we found a compelling and huge pain and gain, and have the problems, have customers living with your product. But we move into customer validation. Here is where we're really testing the business model. Can we actually produce it, deliver a product at a price, and produce it at a cost which actually allows us to make some money? So we can pass the stop sign here when we have deals, each deal is actually creating positive gross profit. Secondly, you clearly know who the target is. In other words, where the pull is going to come from in the marketplace. You know how to get at it. In other words, how to sell to it, how to market it, how to support it, right? And it's worthwhile. And you know that the sales process that you're using, whether it's direct, whether it's indirect, is a repeatable, scalable process. Okay? Those are the early adopters. Those are the people who are willing to look at your product and say, if I use your product, I'm probably actually going to get a benefit, a competitive advantage in the marketplace. How many of you have read the book Crossing the Chasm? Okay, Crossing the Chasm should be on everybody's reading list if you're starting a business in technology, because it talks about technology adoption, life cycle, where there is a gap between the early adopters and the early majority. And so we have just talked about the innovators and early adopters who are in the very early stages, before the chasm actually exists. So once we have these guys, we need to get ready to sell, revise potentially our positioning, and if we haven't got enough market, if we haven't actually got enough traction where we can have proven our business model, we have to pivot. We have to stop and reevaluate. How can I get my costs down? How can I get bigger value in the marketplace? Or if we have enough value, if we have a provable, validated business model, we can proceed. And we proceed across the chasm. Okay? So that's very defined. We're talking startup here, and that little journey of customer discovery and customer validation, that can take anywhere from 3, probably maybe as little as 3 or 2 or 3 years, to certainly as long as 7 or 10 years for some businesses, depending upon the nature of the business, the number of cycles, how long it takes them to go through the different cycles. But traction is absolutely critical. You had a session that was talking about intellectual property. Well, the best intellectual property that you have is customers, paying customers that have validated your product. Forget about patents, all that sort of stuff. Again, horror stories from my NBS days. I had a patent fight for 5 years. Best patent guy you could possibly imagine defending us or working with us. He was the guy who won $650 million from Research in Motion. He was our patent lawyer on our hardware, and we still couldn't win the patent. We were spending $1 million a year against our competitor. You have to have a patent. You have to be able to defend it. You have to fight it in every jurisdiction around. So the best thing you can do is innovate and get customers. Okay? Don't spend money on patent lawyers and writing patents unless you're in the drug business. So market validation is critical before you try crossing the chasm. Customer discovery, where you're testing your hypothesis. Validation, you're testing your business model. Customer creation is when you're really starting to expand. And then customer building is a much more, you're getting into the broader market, shall we say, the much larger market. So we want to compare this to the technology adoption cycle. We have early adopters and innovators on the left-hand side. We have the early majority, which we can refer to as the first group as the bowling pins. Second is being the tornado. There's another book by Jeffrey Moore called Inside the Tornado, which is what happens when you have created so much demand for your product. You have done such a great job of addressing the pain in the marketplace, and you have such a compelling, you have actually an unfair competitive advantage, an illegal competitive advantage, as some would say, that people are coming to you and you're just struggling to keep up with the growth of the business. That's the tornado. The bowling pin is your launch place where you hit the first lead pin and try to knock down the other ones afterwards. The chasm sits between the early majority and the early adopters. So if you're in the digital media business, where you might have freemiums service and paying customers, here's your freemium over here. You got 100,000 users, but you're still losing money. All the paying customers are sitting on the other side of the chasm. You got to figure out how to get over there and convert these, monetize these people without scaring all these people away. That's a challenge. So that's the customer discovery model. Steve Blank. If you would like to see his book, it's called 4 Steps to Epiphany. I highly recommend getting that one as well. And it relates to Jeffrey Moore's book called Crossing the Chasm as well. Yes, question?
So Steve Blank also says that this model could not be applied to some sort of entertainment or / social services. What is your take on it? So would you say that it's possible to apply? Because sometimes for products like Facebook or Twitter, unless you have lots of users, you cannot prove that the model works.
I don't think, well, a lot of businesses, most businesses go in unless certainly on the customer discovery side, they don't know if the business works at that point, right? That's testing demand. So until you've actually created a profitable business, you haven't actually proven a business model. You're a temporary institution, right? So is Twitter a real business? I don't know. I've read some recent things that, it's raised a lot of money. Does that legitimize it as being a real business? I'm not so sure. Facebook has certainly generated enough income. Now I think they're profitable and growing. So in an entertainment business, I think you have to do it differently. You have to prove, and you can do a lot of experimentation at a very, very low cost. And so you are getting out into business for a long period of time without making any money. But then so do drug businesses. To develop a drug may be 12, 14 years before you're profitable. So it's not so much the length of time. It's a question you still have to prove the business model. You're going to have a hard time convincing investors to come and join your company unless you can explain how you're going to give them a return. Saying I'm going to get bought out isn't really a great way. I differ with Basil Peters about exits and things like that. My view is you got to find a way, and you got to show a way to be profitable. Otherwise, you're out on a limb, and somebody may chop it off on you. Yeah.
How do you actually structure these questions so you don't end up with sort of a Henry Ford scenario where you ask people what they want and they say a faster horse? And when you're considering entering a product into the market, how do you make sure that the questions you're asking fit within the contextual framework or even outside the contextual framework of the average person that you're asking?
Well, first of all, you've got to look at what is it that you're looking for. You're looking for what the pain is. What problems are they? So the best way to perhaps do that is to start by what is the existing situation? What is their current solution to the problem? And if you get them to walk through their current solution and ask them what they like about it, what they don't like about it, price, features, timing, all sorts of different things, all the different attributes of the product. What is it that they do or don't like? So if you can, if you're not too far out in left field in terms of this really, really new market, you probably have a competitor that you're thinking of right now that you're saying, I can do it better than them. So asking people who are using your competitive products is a great place to start. What do you like? What don't you like? Right? But keep in mind, focus on their experience. Very illuminating when you hear what their experience is. And try not to think about what your product is. And of course, the key thing in doing any of this discovery questioning is asking open questions. In other words, you don't want yes-no answers. You might want to get some idea of pricing or some idea of costs or whatever so that you can understand the value equation, but you've got to be very open. Any other questions? Okay, so the question at the top of the page here is, why create a positioning statement? Anybody?
So you know how you pitch your product to the customer.
Okay. Any others?
It's you going through the right thought process, and also anyone on your team going through that same thought process.
Okay, get alignment of people, yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good thoughts. The real underlying reason, right, is to make it easier for customers to find you. Right? Make it easy for customers to find you. And if you think of the construct of a positioning statement, it starts by talking about who the customer is. Hopefully, as very detailed as you possibly can be. Secondly, it talks about what pain they have, who need, what they want, right? What their pain is. So you're immediately addressing the emotional aspects of the customer. So you're calling them by name, and then you're saying, gee, do you really have, a sore stomach? Right? Then you're offering a solution, but you're actually engaging them by calling them by name as closely as you possibly can. And if you're general in the first line, you've missed the boat entirely. You've got to get really specific. And in your second line, you've got to get as emotional as you possibly can, use as emotive words as you possibly can about the needs and wants of your customer the problems that you're going to fix and address. Right? And so if you can use those, then your customers immediately identify with you. They understand, they realize that you perhaps understand their problem. At least they're going to give you a try. Right? And because you're talking to their issue. Okay, so you've got to remember in the buying process, in order to understand the selling process, you've got to understand the buying process. And it's all about me as the buyer. How are you satisfying my needs? What are you doing for me? What have you done for me lately? Right? And so it's really important as the seller that you actually don't sell. Right? You actually want to just position and hopefully have them come to you and find you. That would be the ideal world. And you've done your positioning right. You don't have little you sell, the better you're doing on your positioning. Really critical, right? So it's not about push. It's about making sure that you understand what the issues are in the market, and they will come to you. Now, yes, you have to do some communication. Yes, you have to get awareness out there. But it's really critical that you use the emotion side of attracting customers. So let's look at the anatomy of a market. First of all, the market itself is all the potential buyers for a product. The segments are a grouping of buyers that have a common set of characteristics, of needs, of referencing each other, buying patterns and pricing, etc. The buyer types help you sell to different personas or different people. We talked about the buyer types earlier in terms of whether they're a channel partner or whether they're a cog in the overall product. And then we actually want to look at the qualitative behavior of individual people or personas in the business. And individual customers are the ones that would actually use your product. So there's lots of, to get right down to the individual customer, we actually want to understand who it is that is our ideal customer and try to describe them. Okay, so we want to create a visual of the ideal customer. Very, very critical. I think my friend Dave Thomas talked about how, yeah, it might be nice to sort of have an overall idea of how big the market is, but you actually win in the marketplace by selling or converting leads into customers. Well, having a good idea of who the ideal customer is really helps other people identify with you and your product. Okay? Really critical. So there's some things that you want to think about as in characterizing the product. These might be old school to some of you if you've been through any marketing programs, but we've got demographic properties, which are, number of employees in the firm, annual revenue, in the industry that they're in, how far they are in our country, or they in another country, etc. And we have sociographic properties. What's their current situation? Current solution that they're using in the business. How long have they had it? Are you replacing a 50-year-old machine? Are you replacing a 3-year-old piece of machine? What's the business's expansion plans? So this is the characteristics of the company in terms of its overall industry and social context, we'll call it. And then we have some of the psychographic aspects. Yes, companies have personalities. That's why we talk about company cultures. And are they, leaders? Are they innovators? Are they real penny pinchers? Who are you selling to? High in the organization, at the CEO level, down lower in the organization? Are they a Sam Walton, a value buyer, or are they a Neiman Marcus, Holt Renfrew at the top end of the scale? Those are different characteristics that you need to understand in your go-to-market strategy. Because selling to an enterprise, you better understand that they have a personality. And you should understand what that personality is. Which one do you want to sell to? Do you want to sell to the low-cost provider? Do you want to sell to the high-value retailer or high-value distributor, whatever? So here is Here is an example of Neoteric and what they did to identify the ideal customer using what's called a tool called a mind map. And you can Google mind map and find these tools. And so here what they've created is, here is the ideal customer. And so here are the characteristics, their culture, what do they care about, what are the different buyer types that they have, the decision-making process they use, what's their age of solution, and what hospitals do they have. So these are the various, I'm going to call them factors that they looked at. And then in describing those factors, culture, their quality-oriented, union environment, resistant to change. What do they care about? Saving lives, saving money, saving time. Their buyer types, they've got transfusion nurses, they're the actual users. They got the economic buyer, who's the CFO, and the blood bank manager, who's the manager of the users. And then what is the contextual situation? What's the age of their solution that the current solution is, right? And then who is the bigger market that they're actually dealing with, which are hospitals. And you might even want geographically say they're in the US or they're in California or wherever. So this is the way that you can help to describe, not only for yourself to capture what's going on, but also to your team as to exactly who you're going after as a customer. In digital media, a little different characteristics. We might be looking at, because these are typically individual users, what gender, what age, what income level, all sorts of demographic properties. And then we have some sociographic situation. What are they using? What characteristics? What are they trying to satisfy? What's their decision-making process, etc. And then psychographic. Well, I guess that's because we're dealing with individuals and we can be as complex as terribly complex. So there's all sorts of wants and needs that we're out there trying to satisfy. And you want to try to pick what is it that you're doing here in your ideal customer. As you just create a mind map for your ideal customer, which one of these factors might be at play? So here's an example of FitBrains. I don't know if you're familiar with FitBrains. We're a Vancouver company developed by a neuroscientist who created an application to help people maintain their brain acuity. It was originally targeted at stay-at-home moms who had, in the sandwich generation, who had parents who were starting to suffer from Alzheimer's. These are the type of recent experiences that they've had. What they want is they want to maintain their mental wellness. They want a rewarding experience. And so it was actually a game where they were playing against other people, and they got to measure how they were doing. And now that company has been bought out by, anybody know the story? Bought out by Rosetta Stone. So, Rosetta Stone is in education, kind of a related field, but very, very interesting story of how they initially targeted stay-at-home moms and then expanded beyond that and just took off because they found that people riding trains didn't want to be just texting. They actually wanted to be entertained and exercising their mental ability. I think they had there's 5 different facets. And just go on the website, it's still there, still being used, still being sold. And when you see how they actually gamified the knowledge or gamified the exercises so that you were competing and scored against other people, it was a real driver for people to go back and reuse it. So again, a very good understanding of who their ideal customer is by looking at the different characteristics, and by doing that, understanding what their needs and wants are, what their buying patterns were, and they could have a laser-sharp focus going into the market and building their product to suit that market. So let's look now, move into the different buyer types. And I've sort of hinted and talked around a little bit of what the different buyer types are. There's really 3 different groups here, 3 key groups. The user buyer, who is the user of the product, always the end game, if you will, of how the product is consumed, who's getting some usability value. You have technical buyers that are people who can say no, but they can't actually say yes. They don't actually approve it. They can prevent you from buying, but they're there from a compliance or a fit standpoint. And then there's the economic buyer, the people who actually write the check, pay for the service, pay for the product, etc. So the user buyers who actually use the product, your product, makes their job better, makes their life fun, allows them to learn, automates or saves them time or saves them money, and it might make them more productive, adds their transferable skills, and or possibly makes them more promotable. Look at the technical buyers. It could be the IT department, finance department, who's looking at different reports that have to be produced, IFRS standards, accounting standards, maybe doesn't meet those. Purchasing departments, there's a specification they've been given by engineering, so it doesn't comply, or terms and conditions in the contract don't fit. Regulators who might say, you don't meet our standards, you don't have the right ownership, you're foreign owned or not from BC or not from Vancouver, whatever. And then there could be mom and dad who are just saying, no, privacy issues, you're not buying that, it's pornographic, if it's, you're overseeing kids, etc. Right? So different people can be the technical buyer. In fact, you can be the technical buyer and the user buyer and the economic buyer all in one, right? But you're going to go through all of those different evaluations. So the economic buyer is the one who writes the check. Typically, CFO, CEO, could be you, could be a board of governors or councils, could be mom and dad with a credit card for children. Right? So in the buying process, there very often, or at least maybe not 3 separate people, but there's 3 separate evaluations that are going on. Even you, when you're considering buying something, you probably first say, I need a new car. And then you think about it, you say, okay, well, what is it that I really want? Well, I really want that BMW that really drives zoom zoom. Then you sort of say, okay, well, what are the tech specs? Well, I really wanted the 5 Series, but I can only afford the 1 Series. It goes just as fast anyway, so it's okay. And then you look at the economics of it. You say, okay, I can justify buying this particular one. That's the only one that I can buy. So you're looking at all of the factors, the technical factors, the usability factors, the fit, feel, fun aspect of it, as well as can I actually write the check. It's all happening in different parts of your head, the rational, the emotional, etc. In some cases, obviously in entrepreneurs or in enterprises, it's actually 3 different heads that are doing that evaluation. The CFO, the CTO, or the CIO, or whatever, and the actual operations manager who might be using your software or your product. Okay, so in focusing and developing personas for the buyers, you actually need to factor in and need to create an understanding of what's happening with each one of these guys. You want to focus on what their experience is. Again, what are you being hired to do? What's your product being hired to do? What's the satisfaction that's coming out of it, right? It's not about the features. It's what's the gain that they are getting from it, right? What's the end goal? So again, you want to talk about emotion, not rational stuff. I'm an engineer. Fought this for 20 years. This is logical. Just buy it. Well, if there's no emotional tie-in to it, right? I have to respect the cerebral engineers, the psychologists that figured out that once you get hooked on something, you're actually going to find a way to buy it. Okay, so I think our time is kind of tight tonight, so we're not going to break into separate exercises, but I encourage you after the session to go back to your office, write down and describe your customer in terms of what is the persona of the person. You can start with doing it in a mind map. You can use some of the tools. I think the PDF and whatnot of this material will all be available to you, so you can do it. So we've been talking about buying decisions, and who makes the buying decision, the heart or the head?
Hard.
Okay.
Depends on your job.
Yeah?
Depends on the product.
Why?
Well, if you're buying something to eat, you want something that tastes good. Or
I didn't say your stomach.
well, that's the
It's 90% heart and 10% head. That's what I heard.
Yeah. It's the heart that actually decides. All right? I mean, when I say heart, I mean emotionally. That actually hooks you, right? And you rationalize the decision. Your head justifies it. You go through the rational process. So maybe the head is kind of split between the right side and the left side. I can always get those things confused. But it's actually, if you haven't captured somebody, those people who are in enterprise sales, and you find that there is actually this long, protracted sales process that's going on, the reason is because you haven't actually captured the emotional issue. There isn't a burning desire for a solution. There may be a rational reason, but there isn't a burning desire for a solution. Right? And so as an entrepreneur, it's really critical that you understand that burning desire for a solution. Because if you don't understand it, it's going to burn you, literally. It's going to burn a hole in your wallet. You're going to find protracted sales cycles, not enough demand for your product. Okay? And so if you haven't understood that emotional need that's out in the marketplace, then you can't possibly find the solution, the right solution for it. First, there has to be that need. Okay, so in your go-to-market approach, we really have to look at that target market and narrow your focus down. It'll actually help you understand and isolate a much more critical burning need if you target the market. And for each one of the target markets, you actually have to identify what's in it for the buyer. And you've got 3 buyers. You always have these 3 heads going on. It's like Medusa or whoever the three-headed snake was or whatever? Thank you, Hydra. You have the economic buyer, you have the user buyer, and the technical buyer. You want to start with the user buyer because you're actually trying to determine what is the utility that you're providing to the marketplace. But then as you have different markets, if you have a multifaceted product, if you have a multi-layered product in terms of the value of extended value chain, you literally have to create a user, technical, and economic buyer for each layer or each market that you're dealing with. Yes, it gets complicated. Again, find ways to keep it simple so that you're working on a component of the market to begin with, to get into the marketplace. And so you need to gain agreement from each of these buying influences, the economic buyer, the technical buyer, the user manager buyer, as in the case of Neoteric, and the user. So that your differentiated value is superior to the competitor's differentiated value. So you need to create a target and create that Whiffin factor. So how many have seen the value proposition statement as distinct from the positioning statement? No? All right. So the value proposition statement is addressing the rational side, the financial side, typically. What's being saved? What's the gain in it? What's the benefit in it here? And so we almost repeat line 1 and line 2, but then we get into a key measurement, a quantitative value that is actually improving, that you're addressing on, in terms of the benefits that you have described in your positioning statement, which is repeated on line 4, all right, as a result of the feature that you've created, and then what's your cost? So that people can do a really simple, easy comparison between how much I have to pay, how much value I'm creating. If you could possibly do it, use exactly the same units. Dollars per hour, dollars per hour, dollars per month, dollars per month. One-time cost, one-time cost. Okay? At this point, it might be just a guess. Start out with a guess and validate it. This is where you can get some idea from customers of, is it worth it for me to go with somebody I don't even know to get this amount of benefit? So here are some examples for you. Here's Neuroterix. This is their positioning statement, right, for blood banks, departments and hospitals who need to lower their costs of reducing blood wastage and transfusion labor. Neoteric is a blood transfusion management hardware and software solution that provides controlled access blood storage so that unused blood allocated to operations can be returned to central storage, eliminating wasted blood. Unlike competitors, such as paper-based system manual methods, our product eliminates deaths from blood mismatching or using barcode in confirmation. Now, if we translate, that's the positioning statement. We go to the value proposition. This is the user buyer. So these are the nurses on the floor. We believe that transfusion nurses should be able to reduce transfusion labor by 75% through the ability to eliminate a second nurse checker. So the main problem was mix-ups of blood, right? And so this system had enough of checks and balances in it that they didn't have to have two nurses, one sort of like the co-pilot thing where they're doing all the cross-checking. Same thing before you went into an operation is what they had to do. So as a result of the technology implementation, as a result of implementing barcode cross-checking at the bedside, right, for an investment of approximately $200,000. Right? So that's the user of the system. Now, I should explain that this market is really the U.S. market, where they pay for blood, not like Canada where it's free, it's donated. So people pay for their blood. Secondly, the costs in the United States, in case you haven't read anything recently about Medicare in the United States, about double what it is in Canada. So cost is and private health systems in the United States is a really critical factor. So the user manager, these are the managers of the nurses, all right? They can reduce the blood bank labor by 30% while maintaining existing service levels. Hey, that's kind of neat. I have 30% less people to look after. And allocate blood just in time rather than in advance. Again, they have the same investment dollars. And then the hospital CFO, obviously economically, reducing the overall cost of blood transfusions, that's both wasted blood and wasted labor, by 10%, which is a pretty, in running multiple operating rooms in large hospitals, it's a pretty significant cost. So the $200,000 was a pretty decent payback. So that gives you an idea of the of an enterprise. Here's a digital media explanation for Fit Brains, which we talked about earlier. For females aged 35 to 55 in North America who need to maintain, this is their positioning statement. Right? Meant to maintain their brain acuity in an effective way, a scientifically proven training technique using an online casual games platform that provides a suite of online casual games that exercise all 5 main areas of the brain, helping to develop a healthy lifestyle. Unlike competitors like Loomis Labs, our product is fun, social, and competitive. So here we are. So we believe that MUM can increase your brain acuity by 25% through the ability to exercise all 5 parts of the brain, just like line 4 of the positioning statement, as a result of the use of this to deliver scientifically proven neuroscience for a cost of $200 per year. Okay? Not quite a payback or cost saving here. You got to say, is $200 a year worth maintaining my brain acuity, right? So, what are the factors here that you got to think about, you got to realize in your discussion? In the case of the digital media one with mums, it's one buyer doing the judge of, I'm the user, can I use this thing technically, is it going to fit on my iPhone and can I work it, and do I justify the $200, right? All in one. So as we're writing these, you want to think about what are the painkillers, what are the things that are creating and generating value, and how can you quantify them? What are the gain creators? You know, that's the positive side. So I'm creating positive feelings, positive emotions. Right? And in assessing those in your dialogue with customers, your discovery questions, what you want to also do is determine, quantify the impact. So you want to rank and get some assessment of the intensity, the frequency of the pains that they're experiencing. On the gain side, what is relevant? You know, is it relevant that I feel better? Is it relevant that I feel smarter? How is it? And what are the different things that are on the gain side that are really important to me? And then you can start capturing what the real true emotion is about using your product and what is it that you're really satisfying. Okay? Again, allows you to hone the product, features, characteristics to meet the customer's needs. So that's a lot about buying. And now we've got to start thinking about moving ahead and getting into the marketplace. I'm going to say moving from the discovery portion into the validation point. So one person that most of you, I guess I'm old enough, most of you maybe aren't that old, Yogi Berra, had some wonderful quotes. So I'm going to borrow one here from him. Very true. If you don't know where you're going, you're probably not going to get there. In other words, if you don't write a plan and get it down hard about what you're doing and measure your progress, you're not going to achieve your results. Plain and simple. Do you ever go on a trip without figuring out actually where you're going to go? Okay? This is a journey. Make a journey map. Write it down. Put some milestones along the way, destination points. Measure where you are in the process. That's what I want to talk about. First of all is the customer segment. And this may be review for you, Maybe you've been covered by some of this. I know you went through some segmentation. So a customer segment is a set of actual or potential customers. Duh. For a given set of products or services, duh, who have a common set of needs, the same needs, the same pains, right? The same, not different ones. And fourthly, who reference each other. Who reference each other. If it's somebody who is in Vancouver who is buying your product and you're now trying to sell to somebody in Kuala Lumpur, they're probably not referencing each other. They may not even be referencing themselves, people from Kitsilano to Surrey to Abbotsford. It's a common set of people. And there's one, they also, and just to add, they also probably buy through the same channels or buy through the same methods. They buy the same volume of products and services, and they probably pay the same price or very close to the same price. Okay? That's how you understand, or that's how you see that you have a market, actual market segment. But this referencing is absolutely critical. Can anybody tell me why? Yep.
Because you want to obviously have a viral growth or word of mouth that somebody has, can recommend your product to somebody else and that spreads out.
Exactly. Exactly. That's one of the reasons why they will buy. Why is it important to you as a business? Right? So they reference, there's a viral component, right? So he said there's a viral component, and so they will buy it because they're getting reference from friends or people that they know that the product is good and they should buy it. Yeah.
Because you know your customer, that person's, you're building your user profile. So now you know that these customers have these needs and wants and buy that product.
Okay. Good point. What's the financial benefit?
You're actually building a product and having something that becomes repeatable.
Yep. Okay, it's repeatable. Yep.
If they're all referencing each other, then once you've got most of the segment, you've got it locked up.
You got it locked up. But most importantly, if they're referencing each other, they're probably coming to you saying, can I buy your product? Your sales costs go way down. So the common mistake of entrepreneurs is trying to go, I got to hedge my bets. I think my product can do this, it can do this, it can do this. So I go into all these different market segments, and his costs of marketing and sales go way up. Costs of support go way up. Product development costs go way up. Okay? You reduce your cost of getting into a business by focusing on a market segment and getting the tornado going inside that market segment. Okay? It allows you to have the same offering. It allows you actually to get pulled into the marketplace and less time on marketing and selling. Okay? Your development costs, typically in an ongoing business, your engineering costs should be probably less than 15% overall engineering and kind of operations costs. Like if you're spending 12% on just pure R&D, right? That's a lot. That's what people like Nortel and RIM and all that sort of stuff are spending. So if you're spending that much money, you're spending way too much. You need to spending more money than that. You're going to need to actually dial it back. You need to focus in on getting less spent on product changes and modifications and more focus in terms of the markets that you need. Okay, so market segments are critical, and so defining it and actually defining the sweet spot is really critical. So I'm going to really quickly go through this because I think you've been through it. But let's look at an electric car. Kind of in topic these days. So we divide this market in terms of geographics in a bunch of different characteristics: the region, the size, the distance, and the driving characteristics. Then we break it up this way in terms of, where are they? North, central, east, west, rural, suburban, smaller urban, large urban. what distance are they driving every day to work, and then what's their nature, what type of roads are they going on, right? City roads, ferries, whatever. And then we look at really where is it that we want to sell to. So we want for an electric car, West Coast, smaller urban, 1 hour's drive, city roads. Right, so summarizing that in words. And then we can look at other attributes, which are the demographic attributes. What's their marital status, their income, their education, their political views, right? So marital status, probably married. Income levels, different, low income to high income. Education level, everything from high school up to advanced education. And then what's their political views, right, left, center, green, whatever. So then we can draw, again, where do we think our target market is? And again, we're doing this, drawing this, because we've done the customer discovery. We've gone out and talked to people who are interested in buying cars. We understand that this is probably what they really want. And the sweet spot is they want to buy a second car within 6 months. So they're probably already in the hunt, right? They're looking for a solution already. Their pain is they need a new other car. Their car is dying, right? Maybe they just had a huge repair bill, right? So this is critical because it defines the timing. So if we summarize these into all of the various attributes, right, we get quite an interesting picture of exactly who it is that we want to go after. Now our marketing job becomes connecting with these people. Only these people. In fact, I might even want to put a name to my customer here. George and Mary, right? And they live in Kitsilano, or I don't know, South Granville, whatever. And they live in such and such a house, and they have so many kids, and they have a dog. What is it? What is their experience that they want? What is it they feel when they drive the car? That they love the silence of it, right? They love the quietness. They love the ease with which they love the fact there's no odor. What are the sensory things that they're feeling? This goes back to the mind map that we were talking about. That's what I mean about knowing who your buyer is. What is his experience, and how are you satisfying that? So we start connecting all of these dots. We have a segmentation chart, which helps us get a little bit narrow focused. We have individual users, which gets us down nice and narrow, helps to define exactly the emotions that they're going through about buying our product or approving our product in the case of the technical buyer, right? We understand what our sales methodology is going to be, how many channels how many different distributors we're going to have, or where our product fits in the overall component towards the end user. So we created a map, if you will, of how we can go to market. And we have a good view of who it is that we want to talk to. Okay. So those tools, I hope you will be able to find and develop those persona tools, the value propositions. If you have to write 9 of them, you have to write 9 of them. If that's how your market is, you need to understand that. If you don't, somebody else is going to eat your lunch. Okay? So let's think about now how we want to put it into action in terms of creating and generating some revenue. How many of you were at the first session? Uh-oh. Okay. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you remember this? Okay. Okay, remember what it means?
No, just
Okay. Leads times conversion rate times price equals revenue. And I don't want to trivialize this, but there are so many people that put together a business plan which is based on the market is 1 billion. Our market, our target market is 200 million. We're going to get 10% of this market. Not true. You haven't got a clue what that market is all about unless you look from the bottom and start looking up. And that is, how do you start with your personas that I've just gone through with you to attract leads and find an effective conversion factor at the price that you're going to charge to generate revenue. Okay? So your sales plan is all about building and creating and generating, working this formula. It's not about a top-down formula. Top-down formula might be helpful to describe it to some overall investment banker or whatever, somewhere down the road, if you have to. But in terms of driving your business and being successful in generating revenue for your business, it's all about leads, conversion factors, and pricing. So we analyzed the market. Let's analyze a sale. Sales is an agreement of value between a buyer and a seller. Right? It's an agreement between a buyer and a seller. And that agreement means that there is value for both. There's value for the seller and value for the buyer. An agreement requires a relationship. Right? And a relationship, you can't have a relationship if you're unaware of that other party. So it requires awareness. And you also aren't going to have a relationship with somebody unless there is trust. So that process of creating awareness and trust takes time. It doesn't just happen. It helps when we go back to what we talked about positioning, where he said if you can get people who are and positioning and market segments where they're referencing each other, because that is helping to both create awareness and create trust. You're getting reference from somebody else who they trust, and they're getting told about your product. Absolutely critical. Okay? And the value is the need based matched with your fit to the solution. So the fit to the solution is how well have you designed your product in order to address the needs, and hopefully you've gone through all the customer discoveries you've been talking about in these seminars about minimum viable product, how you can get into the marketplace, doing testing, etc. So that's the value side. But you can't have a sale unless you do the awareness and trust side of it as well. So the good news is that in the course of doing your customer discovery, you're actually creating awareness and you're creating trust. If you're actually engaged in discussions with people about what is your problem and would this solution help you, and would you pay this much for it, and it generates this much value for you, you've actually starting to create a whole bunch of trust and awareness of your product. So you're not losing time by doing the customer discovery and the customer validation aspects of your business. Some people you may talk to, you may not get back to them for a year or 2 years, whatever, depending upon what the nature of your business is. But you are building awareness and building trust. You have to do more of it, but the good news is your customer discovery process actually begins that process. Secondly, in creating your map, you have to understand how it is that you're selling. So your sales process begins with creating awareness. You have to allow customers to evaluate your product somehow, whether you're talking about web or whether a real product. You have to figure out how it is that they're going to purchase it over time, all at once. And then how do you deliver it? How do you continue to deliver it? And how do you potentially create post-purchase customer support and add-on business from the existing customers? So in designing and determining your business, You have an option of using your own facilities or direct facilities, and digital media typically is through your own facilities, but sometimes you're working through other people. Hootsuite sort of works with other people. And so you want to create your construct or define your construct as to how it is that you're going after the marketplace, segment by segment by segment. Okay? Because every time you change the way you approach the customer, change your channels, you're probably changing your market segment. So pick one, learn how to do it efficiently, and build and grow on that. So enterprise sales, we have salespeople who have to basically deliver the results. So those salespeople can be direct salespeople, they can be working through a channel. Again, the salespeople or the managers of the channel have to deliver the results. The sales process is to engage, convert, measure, and manage the opportunities. And the sales execution, management, and coaching is to measure, learn, improve, continuously improve. It's all about growth. Digital media, a little different. A lot more marketing focus. You don't have direct selling. You're selling through a web domain, typically. Your sales process is your website to engage, convert, and measure and manage the opportunities of those people that come onto it. And again, your analytics, or you're using analytical tools on your website to measure, learn, and improve. Okay? Lots of similarities, different ways that you implement. So sales is a process. Sales is a process. Processes have beginnings and ends and feedback loops. And you have to construct one for your business. If you don't, you will fail. You have to understand what are the key conversion factors. I think some of the prior speakers talked about vanity analytics and things like that. And it's important that you understand the ones that are the levers of your business, that if you improve on those conversion factors and on those different variables in your formula, your sales process, that you will drive improved results. Constantly measure them. Okay? So we talk about the sales funnel, which means that you've got the market at the top, you've got some interested people, and eventually they fall out and they become customers. So in an enterprise sales funnel, we talk about suspects, prospects, and clients. Clients coming out the bottom, being closed, and we have at the top the market, and we want to measure that to be sure that we understand how likely the business, a particular suspect, is likely to become a revenue, or how likely a prospect is likely to become a close, and we measure this progress through each stage. There are many different ways or many different stages that you can construct. I've simplified it down to 3. A suspect, which is basically a lead that has come to us. A prospect, which has been qualified, shown some interest, have not bought yet. And then the client who has come through. Okay, the transition between the different stages occurs when specific things happen or have happened or are known about the opportunity. So in a very complex sales opportunity that may take 18 months or 12 months to go through, selling $1 million piece of welding equipment or something like that, or one of my clients sells $1 million piece of robotic equipment for the pharmaceutical sales. So sales process is a very long one. So you need to determine individual milestones that go through the sales process to ensure that you know where you are on your roadmap to closing those business deals. In the digital media space, basically, you go from acquire to activate, and you're through. Once you've attracted the client, the critical element is how do I monetize them and how do I minimize churn. It doesn't cost me much to keep a customer. If they're engaged and interested, hopefully it doesn't take a lot if I've got a good program or good system. But I do have to minimize churn. I have to maximize and keep people using and interested in the business. Otherwise, they will leave. So how does this relate to our funnel? Well, how does the funnel relate to earlier stuff on the positioning statement? Line 1 and line 3, the market and the category of your positioning statement, are above the funnel. It's the general market. They don't know about you yet. They're not a lead. They haven't expressed any interest in your business. Okay? Once they've expressed an interest in your business, you've captured them. They've identified themselves as having a need. In other words, they're interested in the solution that you're offering. And they move down the funnel as they confirm the benefit and the timing and the value that you're creating. You get them down in the choke point when they're evaluating you versus the competition, and when you've clearly articulated that your differentiator is the winning solution, that's when they've selected you and you get some revenue at the bottom above the goal. Okay? So if we look at the funnel, above the funnel, right, the key activity here is lead generation. How do I get the people that are out there to know me, awareness, secondly, trust me, right? So that they understand that I know what their problem is and I have a better solution than anybody else. At least they're interested enough to investigate. So you have always a bit of a challenge here between quantity versus quality. You want to have enough leads to act on, but you don't want to have a bunch of leads that really are off target. And a key clue on that is if you're just slamming out and getting people to come to your website and click on something, but they're really totally off target, you may be doing a great job of email marketing or social media marketing, but you're missing the boat. You're far too general in terms of what your positioning is all about. You want people to come to your marketplace, to your website, or calling you, if it happens to be a direct sales force, where they are probably doing a lot of self-qualification, so that you don't have a lot of loss through your cheat. You're spending money to get leads. So the good positioning that we referred to about making it easy for you to be found, right, is critical to enhancing the quality of the leads that are coming to you. Right? You've got to start working on all of those things that make it easy for you to be found, which includes addressing the emotional needs of your customers. 57% of the buying process is above the funnel. 57% is above the funnel. We're now in the world of the internet where people have tons and tons of ability to research the market and find out what's out there. Okay? So think of it. You need to have your customers find you, because they're not waiting for a salesman to call them. They don't have door-to-door. We don't have door-to-door salesmen anymore, except for the people who are trying to sell me lawn care or something like that, right? And even great lawn care story is some guy who absolutely blew the market out on lawn care because he could deliver a quote anywhere in the county or anywhere in the Lower Mainland, for example. This happened to be in the U.S., so I talk counties. He could do it in 20 minutes without even visiting the person's house. How did he do it? Google Maps, exactly. He ended up absolutely clobbering the competition in about 4 states and then got bought out by, I don't know, the Weed Man or Service Master or something like that for millions of dollars, right? So people are using the internet to find you. You have to have an effective positioning on the market, in the internet, on your website, in order to be found, right? And make sure it's efficient by making sure that it clearly articulates the value so that you're getting qualified and good quality leads coming in as opposed to just a ton of volume that really don't fit your particular profile. Okay, so in enterprise sales, we have campaigns, specific campaigns. You've got to put together a very comprehensive, wide-ranging strategy based on, I guess, whatever your budget can be of, maybe it's appropriate for you to do seminars. Education is a great way of getting trust and building awareness. Writing articles, getting out there, talking about the business in general, getting credibility. Cold calls. Well, not too many people do cold calls. You don't do a lot of them these days, but some of them, particularly when you're talking about very technical business, where making a call has a really significant impact. You're still doing cold calling. You might hire an organization to do that. There's a great little company that's just started in Vancouver where they are getting demos for businesses. They are that front end, if you will, for enterprise sales, going after customers or the client base that are, if your market is the Fortune 500 group of people, they're a company that can go out and get you that demonstration. Advertising, trade PR, right? All ways of building awareness, building trust, understanding that you understand the need of the marketplace. In digital media, SEO, AdWords, affiliates, social media, there are, which tool do you want to use? There are lots of them available these days. So it is all about how do we create that in order to create a viral inflow of users into your network. So in the funnel, we have suspects where a lead has expressed an interest in your solution. This is the enterprise again. The prospect, you've identified or qualified the suspect that you can meet their needs, they have money, and they have a time frame to buy. In other words, they have a pain that they can't live with on an ongoing basis. You have to have a solution. And when you've closed that and made them a client, the prospect has not only selected you, but you actually have the purchase order or the credit card number to get paid. So the key sales activity or understanding the conversion factors between suspect to prospect, prospect to close. Suspect to prospect, you might want to have some factors in between factors if you have a long, protracted process where you have confirmed that you understand exactly what the need of the customer is, what the pain is. You verify that there's actually a budget there to pay you should you be winning, or actually budget there to ensure that the project is going to go ahead. And you know why and what the time frame is and who the key people are and who potentially are the internal coaches that are going to help you and be an advocate internally in the organization. They become a prospect when your customer has confirmed that you've won, the contract is signed, there's a deposit in your bank account or a credit card number that you can charge to. In websites, you typically have a very, very fast cycle. You don't have a chance to interact with people. You get very few cues or coaching available to negotiation. There are things now, obviously tools are getting more and more sophisticated, things like when chat things come up, can I help you make this sale? Or there's pop-ups that directing people into different areas. And so websites are definitely getting more and more sophisticated, but you have to automate that process. It's not something which is obviously done manually. Even chats these days are probably a little bit old school. You want to find new analytical methods where you're actually changing your website in order, based on the pattern, based on what people are looking at in the web on your website. So sales is a process to be managed, and you need to understand the various functions, if you will, or formula for converting from leads into revenue. So what are your suspects are basically the target market is a function of the target market. times the percentage of people that are aware and trust you. Your prospects are your suspects times your conversion factor, your ability to convert them and show them that not only do you understand the pain, but you also are providing a benefit of value. And they become a client when you actually can close them. In other words, your value is better than anybody else's that's out there. Your differentiated value is better. So you can't manage what you don't measure. So you have to measure yourself at least at these 3 key points, probably more. If you have a very complex enterprise sale, let me know. I have a worksheet which we use for very complex sales, typically things that take you 12 months or longer, where we go through about 5 different steps in the process, and we have a fill-in worksheet just to help you understand exactly what you have to know in order to close a sale. Establish a criteria for each stage, measure the conversion rate, measure the time, find out why, investigate that, and continue to improve your process. After sales. Sales to existing customers cost you 85% less than attracting a new customer. 85% less. 7 times more to go after a new customer than to get $1 of revenue from an existing customer. What are your retention rates? Absolutely critical. Churn is in a digital media business or a subscription business, churn is a real issue. 3% churn per month will kill your business in about 2 years. Right? It has a compounding effect. And if you're trying to grow at 30% a year, if you've got 3% churn, you won't grow. So it's a key factor, understanding why customers leave. What are your upsell dollars? If you already have a customer, how is it that you can get more revenue, achieve more revenue, provide more services, provide more value to that customer? Again, go back, as we did in the milkshake. Talk to the customers. What is it that I'm being hired to do? What are the other things that we could be doing for you? Okay, and that will grow your dollars per customer as your average revenue per customer and grow your business very nicely. So, tying it all together, first of all, focus your lead generation on your sweet spot. Right? Talked about the segmentation, but even within the segmentation, what's the sweet spot? And throw all of your resources against that. You know, if you just think in a military analogy, which is one which is brought up by Jeffrey Moore in his book, about focusing to cross the chasm. In the case of the military was, how do I get on to the continent of Europe? Right? They had tons of resources, huge masses of resources. They didn't hedge their bets by putting a little bit in Italy and a little bit in Holland and a little bit in France and a little bit up in the north. They went right after a really narrow beach. Very narrow beach with hundreds of thousands of people and machines. And they did it so effectively, they actually created a tunnel, a pipeline of fuel under the English Channel without their enemy knowing about it. So that within 48 hours, they had planes flying from the European soil because they had commanded that soil. Right? They didn't hedge their bets. They said, this is where we're going. And come hell or high water, we're going to claim that territory. That's what that's the resolve that you need as you go into the business, as you go into your market. Do your research. They spent 3 years, at least 3 years preparing, right? Getting all sorts of resources, all sorts of intelligence. You need to do similar types of approaches. Define the persona for your ideal customer. Have it in your mind. Make sure you talk about it with your customers. You know, we coach a lot of our ACE Tech group through our growth strategy program. We continue to talk about the ideal customer. Who is your ideal customer? What's their persona? What do they look like? How many kids do they have? Do they have a dog? What house do they live? What age are they? What's their education level? What's their experience? What do they feel when they buy your product? What makes them proud? What doesn't make them proud? Right? Get a good understanding of who it is, what your buyer is. Sit in their shoes. Make your positioning statement easy for customers to find you, right? By speaking directly to them in terms of who they are the target. Secondly, make sure that your pain that you're describing is one that they are feeling and that you're using very emotional words to describe it. And of course, that you have the solution that solves it, the benefit that's there. Clearly define and measure your steps that you need in order to move leads to customers. L times percent times price is equal to your revenue. And retain your customers. Keep your customers happy to retain them. Find more services to sell to them. Okay? How can you expand your business just by expanding the revenue from your existing customer base? In summary, we've got a positioning statement to capture the heart of your client, right, through its emotional, or through emotion, and through the emotion, or capturing the emotional need of your client. Your value proposition is the quantitative valuation which justifies the benefit that is coming to the customer and puts it up in giving the buyer, whether it's the channel partner that says it's easier to work with you or the user that says your product is absolutely great, gives them a rational buying decision once they already trust you and like you. So each sale has many buyers, so you've got to make sure you understand what's in it for them. And then you have to focus on a segment to keep your selling costs as low as possible, your product development costs as low as possible, and your support costs as low as possible. Sales is a process. You've got to measure it and manage it. Okay? So go sell, but have good luck and good listening. Thank you.